So after last month, when I had Lana read Warhammer, and she had, let's just say, a challenging time with that book, I fully expected for her to get her revenge and throw some fairy smut and have me read that. And instead, she brought God, and the Spanish Inquisition, and it, I don't even know where to go from here.
Hey everyone, welcome to Reading Crossbow. My name is Lena, and we're back with another episode. Here's my buddy Rob.
Hello, everyone, and we're here to review The Familiar.
I'm kind of excited about this one because it's very different. We've had a couple standout books lately in very different genres. So, how did you feel about it?
Well, after the Warhammer book, I was pretty sure you were gonna send back some like fairy smut, and I was gonna have to basically deal with your revenge for that book. And so, this was a very pleasant surprise because this was a very kind of just fun magic story set in the it's a what historical fantasy.
Yeah. I think it surprised us both. This was interesting, and you can see from the cover here, this is a period piece novel. And so based off of the cover, I actually thought we might get a little bit more witchcraft even. There's like a scorpion up the sleeve. There's like, I guess this is like a rosary set, so some religion. You get a bit of that from the book. So I really didn't know what to expect, and it definitely departed from what I thought it was going to be. So that should probably take us to our 10,000 foot summary, right?
Okay. So.
Okay. Well.
Tell me about it.
If I've got this. Okay. So before we start that, if you've never been here before, this is really easy. We're like an adult book club, two people with very different tastes, all in the fantasy genre. Every month we each pick a book. So Rob picks one, I pick one, and then we each do a halfway review of what the other person's suggestion was, and then we both follow up after. So I recommended The Familiar this month by Leigh Bardugo. Rob read it. He gave his halfway review last week. So if you haven't watched that, make sure to go backwards and watch it. And then now we're reviewing together to see if Rob was on track, which I don't know, to see if this turned out how we expected, all spoiler free. But first, Leigh Bardugo, The Familiar, is set in 1600 Spain. It is a period piece in the Spanish Golden Age, and it follows our main character. I wrote it down because the names are funky. Lucia, or there's other ways you can pronounce the name, but we're going with Lucia for this show. And her evolution as a magician of sorts, miracle worker, and she's a scullion, or basically a handmaid or a maiden in a home. Not a very rich home, but a somewhat substantial home. And the owner of the home, the mistress, at one point discovers that Lucia has powers, or can work miracles, as they say in this book. So we'll get into the difference of like wizardry, magic, miracles later on in the show. But, whenever someone discovers something very interesting about someone, especially someone trying to elevate their status, the mistress, her name is Valentina, tries to find a way to capitalize on Lucia's gift, right? And this basically turns into miracle after miracle, catching attention of different well-off people in their city. And then this leads into proving herself as a wizard, magician, miracle worker. And that somewhat leads into this is not accurate, Spanish Golden Age version of the Tri-Wizard Tournament. In which she must win her place to serve the king as his miracle worker. And along the way, she finds adventure, perhaps some love, some duplicity, and a lot of interesting experiences along the way, and a lot of political references and religious references. Very much a lot of like heaven and hell, God and Satan. Very interesting book. We're going to try to not spoil it, but I think there's a few parts that we might have to dive a little bit into.
Okay. Yeah, this is a very interesting read, because it is very much a historical fiction. It tries to stay real to the places and the people that existed in that time, and yet bring in some magic. And we're not talking like subtle magic. By the time we get to that Triwizard tournament, as you called it, like they're doing big magic. Like,
Yeah.
and I mentioned in my halfway, I was like, yeah, if someone were able to do this, that would absolutely justify the Inquisition and them like hunting people down, because that kind of power would be dangerous.
You know, there's a moment in the book where I totally agree with you. It's so funny, but I'm just going to say this. If you read this book, I hope you've also played Tears of the Kingdom, because there's a moment where different parts of magic kind of come together. We have two wielders, so to speak, and they're able to sort of build something, and what they build is very reminiscent of what you can build in Tears of the Kingdom, like Zelda, the new game. And it's like the whole time this was all happening, and I'm picturing it like a movie in my head. I'm like, wait a minute, did they just Zelda this bitch? Because like, whoa. Super funky, totally off track. But yeah, the book was a lot of development happened in just these 360 pages. But you mentioned the setting, so that has to be my first question. And those of you new here, we do this interview style. So I picked the book, Rob did his halfway, I get to interview him now, and I've come up with some questions.
Okay.
So before we get into the questions, let's discuss a couple points that we usually rate the book on. So we're going to start straight into the setting. The setting, as I mentioned, is 1600 Spain, during the Spanish Golden Age. And I'm going to ask Rob what he thinks about it. But before I do, spoiler, there is an acknowledgement section at the end of the book, like there usually is. But before that, there's an author's notes. And the author's note talks about her actually connecting some of this through her family history, using family experiences. So I think she had like a deep connection with this particular setting. So knowing that, how did you feel about the setting of the book, Rob?
I think the setting was very interesting. It's not a time period you commonly get referenced. It's oftentimes it'll be stuff like maybe around that. You're either dealing with Renaissance stuff or maybe Victorian stuff. This time period, I think, kind of gets overshadowed, and so it was actually kind of a refreshing to read a story about this specific time and place, because even if you were doing something in this time, it would probably be dealing with the New World itself, either in the Spanish, Latin America, or maybe in the colonies in North America. So something back at the Spanish in Spain, that's kind of a different angle, and I don't think I've really read any books like this before.
Yeah, I have not. I've watched like some series recently, and we mentioned this when we talked about why I picked this book. And there's some series that are very, very popular right now. Bridgerton is one of them, and that's a period piece. And then there's some other shows on Netflix right now that are period pieces. So this has become very, very popular. And I think it was appropriate. And I almost wonder if Leigh Bardugo was inspired by some of these period piece series that have come out, including Outlander, for example.
Yeah.
So the setting to me was quite fun. We've talked about settings in some books before where they don't, actually like The Last Magician here, where they don't rely on the setting enough for some like references. So for example, in The Last Magician, it was like early 1900s, but they didn't use like names you would have used to call things in the 1900s. But in this book, I thought she did special care to make you feel like you were walking through the time as well, especially with like the clothing that they wore, the name for the maid in the homes, how they talked about different characters. It felt very period relevant to me for the very little I know about 1600 Spain.
And there was also a fair amount of Spanish mixed into the terminology, especially when it dealt with like proper nouns like people's titles or locations. This will sound this might not make sense initially, but it really actually made me think of Klingons in Star
Oh,
Trek because
of
it
course.
because in Star Trek everything's translated to English. Everyone hears whatever their native language is. In like the next generation, except the Klingons, they just say words in their own language that don't get translated, and they immediately translate them, which means everyone knows what that word means. So, but they're doing that in order to kind of set like this, give you that feel of the Klingon, you know, culture. So they're saying, the name of the mealworms that they eat, and they'll say those specific words, and then immediately translate them because the humans are like, ew, gross. But so, and I kind of reference that to this book because like they bring in a lot of Spanish words about like everyone's a don, and the I'm trying to think of some of the other
Like
examples.
maligras,
Yeah,
for miracles, things like that.
yeah,
They use a lot of Spanish words,
yeah.
but like you don't have to look them up
No,
to
no.
get it.
Most of them are stuff you do encounter in the real world, just through popular media. So it's none of it's all that surprising, and so, but it helps kind of pull you into the setting, kind of establish this. Whereas if it was just a straight true translation as of sorts, there wouldn't be those words. They'd just say Lord, and then you'd lose that kind of feeling of golden age Spain.
Yeah, with those, that reminded me a bit of when we read Face the Night, because you said you felt like some Zorro in that, and I got that a little bit in this one. It's probably just the Dons.
Yeah.
There's twice now I've picked a book that's kind of led us down this almost Zorro esque alley, and I'm like, I'm not mad about it.
Yeah, yeah. This is a, and then the other parts of the setting is, essentially it's got to be the Spanish Inquisition. You know, you would pick this time and place specifically because you want that to influence your story. If you didn't want the Spanish Inquisition, you'd pick any other time and place. So I was actually kind of really excited, and kind of the whole book I was like, when are they going to show up? They keep hinting at them, but that they got to come up somehow. Especially considering that our main character is Jewish and she's using magic. There's no way they're not going to come up. And it's actually kind of a neat thing that you can actually have this, historical thing in your novel.
Yeah, I had a great time with that, and I love that you mentioned that she's Jewish. We're gonna put a little pin in that, and we're gonna save that for magic later because this book really goes into divine magic, which is something that we haven't talked about too much on the show because there's all different types of magic, and this is one I haven't delved quite into very much, and the whole book was about that. So what we're gonna do next is we're actually gonna go into characters, and I just made myself a couple little notes here because I thought this time we would talk a little bit about the characters in the book first. I'm gonna give a quick reference to them. Sometimes we talk in the show and it's like we'll bring up a character that we hadn't mentioned in like maybe the summary. I don't know if it's confusing for our viewers, so let's just go over these really quickly. We have Lucia, main character, and she lives with Valentina and Marius. They're her. They are the owners of the home that she works in, and they're the ones who are kind of motivated by status. And then Lucia herself is motivated by greed and promise and wanting to do better for herself. And I actually love that. I'm not going to go. I have a feeling you have some feelings about that. And then we have her aunts, Lucia's aunts, who plays a large part in this story. And she's done very well for herself, but doesn't give handouts to Lucia. So she could better Lucia's status in life, but she doesn't, and she has her own reasons for that. But her name is Halit, and very interesting character. And then this moves us on to Halit's. She's a widow, and she's in the service of Don Victor. And then he has someone in the service of him who works for him, and that's Sant Angel. And these are the main characters of the book, and they all interact with each other. And then some secondary characters that we have are Perez, who is like the former secretary to the king, and he's been disgraced. He's trying to get in the good graces of the king again, and this is basically why he's having this sort of Tri-Wizards tournament, as I said, because he's trying to find this kind of miracle worker for the king. If he does this, he'll get in the good graces, and then we have the king himself, and then the other competitors in this sort of tournament. But now that we've given that to our audience, you guys know kind of who's in this book. How did you feel about the characters in the book, Rob?
I think the characters that were the most interesting to me, or the ones that had the most development, tended to be the miracle workers, the people with the special abilities. They all had kind of interesting backstories and motivations, and I found that to be really interesting. I think the characters that actually probably grew the most was actually her employers, specifically Valentina. They, that character essentially is on her own journey around Lucia's story and growing as an individual, because she starts off in a very kind of miserable place in life, and she's able to actually find meaning in her life. And I found that story to be actually kind of the most interesting, kind of from a character development point of view.
Yeah. How did you feel about our main character, Lucia?
So I liked that Lucia actually could have easily been just dragged into this plot against her will and have a full loss of agency. But like a lot of other characters we've read lately, that might have been what kicked off the events, is something outside of their control. But they very quickly be like, no, someone else chose this path, but darn it, I'm gonna stride this path of my own will and make it mine. And I liked that about her character.
All right. How about Sant Angel, who has this questionable past, who's suddenly been thrown into her life as a tutor, actually, for this tournament that she's been thrust into.
And we'll get a little bit into it with the magic part, but I think his role as the tutor was actually critical to really explaining the magic of this world. I think without that, I might have fallen into, oh, it's just another form of superpowers and been disappointed again. But because of his character, that really brought out the magic. And so he was actually really important to the actual plot of the story. His character, though, he has a great tragic backstory that and I found his story to be very interesting. His interaction with Lucia, I wasn't as excited about. Not just because there's a romance angle that I wasn't excited about, but also because he it felt awkward. There were points to it that didn't seem to line up, and it's hard to explain without spoilers, but their relationship goes from 0 to 100 in 3 pages, and it was like, what happened here?
Yeah, I think it's okay, Rob, if we say, just especially for our female, well, it's not just female viewers, a lot of people read these books, but primarily my friends who read the books I like to read, that it's okay to say this follows a typical almost elf smut fairy trope of you have some extremes here in two types of people. In elf smut, it's usually someone's 1,000 and someone's 16, and you're kind of like, what? In this one, it's not quite like that, but there's enough of those discrepancies that you're like, wait a minute. I thought this was period piece, holy, divine, God, heaven, hell. It's, but wait, what? So there's some, I get that. Yeah.
But his character itself, actually, I found to be very interesting, and it's just, and once again, more stuff we can discuss during the magic, the way he's almost feeding off of her, that and that's more towards the magic side of things. So we'll save that for later. But that was never really well explained or understood, and so I struggled a little bit in that section. But the characters, but I don't know. I thought all the characters were fun, especially the all of the competitors. I think all the competitors were actually pretty great as far as characters.
Now, when you're reading these characters, could you picture them in your mind? Did the author do a good job explaining them and building them that way?
So for me, the I don't get that necessarily from maybe a I don't get that feeling like you do where I want a physical description. What When I get that feeling of, oh, I can understand that character, is more often than not either I can slot them into a known archetype or a feeling like, or if it's like, oh no, this is something wholly unique, that's makes the character, livens up that character for me.
Definitely hit all the buttons for me on the stuff I look for. I mean, in the book, Lucia is like long, curly, thick hair. She keeps it up under a bonnet while she's working. Valentina and Marcius have never seen it. They're like amazed when they see it one day. And it's very descriptive
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Um,
That was a
and
good
then,
scene. That was a really good scene. I actually really liked that scene.
yeah.
When they're taking down her hair and they're like, "What the? How have you hidden this?"
Yeah, where did that come from? Yeah. And then I feel like Sant Angel, he goes through this development that we talked about in how he changes through the novel, which I know we'll get into in Magic, but in my brain, I almost kind of like Benjamin Buttoned him at one point. I'm like, is he like gnarly, shrivelly thing, you know? And then he like kind of gets beautiful, sort of, you know? And I don't think that's too spoilery. Like, I think she does a good job of setting these characters up in like my type of mind where I really picture these things. I am an artist. I like to sculpt. I like to make. I like to, make art. And so when someone can do that with words, I'm pleased. There was another character that surprised me, and that was Tioda. It's one of the Tioda. We don't know how to say these words, but it's okay. We didn't listen to this on audiobook. And she ended up being the author did a great job of describing her one way, and she built up this picture of this character, and you're like, okay, yeah, I get it. And then later on you go kind of like, huh? So like she did these shifts that I thought were really well done. The only character I think that she did somewhat of a disservice to is Lucia's aunt Halitz, just because we're told of her beauty, how wonderfully beautiful she is, but really that's it. I don't think that we get that much description of her. We just know she's a beauty. Yeah. So like I think that was some disservice, but yeah, I was very pleased with the character development.
Yeah, and Lucia, I got this impression, like, because they kept describing her as a very unattractive or homely girl, especially in the first half of the book, and I was like, yeah, but this is more like one of those '80s teen movies where she's going to get glowed up, and suddenly everyone's like, wow, look at her, when she gets cleaned up, and that kind of happened, but not explicitly.
Yeah, it didn't. She didn't. She still got to keep that. I think, which was nice. But one thing that the author did describe really well is like when we think about these time period pieces, especially like 1600s, 1800s, these pieces are very popular to talk about right now, or periods rather. They're completely covered. These women are covered ankles to neck, long sleeve. They barely show bosom. In some parts of the book, they talk about some bosom showing, like, oh, that's too much, And so their hands on women, hands and faces are really what show. And so like freckles, that's a no-no. Hardened, calloused hands. If you have workers' hands, that's a no-no. And so they even focus on that. Like, she has freckles. Like, you're obviously getting out of the house and walking down the street. How dare you? You must be lowly. Or, you have calluses on your hands. You're a worker. And I love that type of detail. But, you ready for the next one?
Sure. Let's see it.
Because I started kind of going into the next one.
Okay.
I was like, maybe we should talk about that. So, writing style. How did you feel about her creative work? Like how she wrote the story?
Overall, I think I really enjoyed the story. I really didn't run into any parts where I was like, I don't want to keep reading this, or this is easy to put down. Um, and while it wasn't as, you know, immersive as maybe some of the other books we've read, where it just pulls you in, it very much made me feel like I was in that setting, and by and it was written well enough that I had those feelings. But I did have some problems with, there's a lot of, and I don't want to say they're plot holes because they're not holes. They're just things that didn't get explained. And there's a lot of these parts throughout this book where there's these moments, and it's like, you're, can you explain that a little bit more? Like, I really want to understand this. This sounds actually really neat. Can we get that a little bit more? And there's many places in this book where things just could have needed maybe a couple more pages of description and explain what just happened here. The author does a good job of, while it's primarily Lucia's point of view, the point of view can shift to what, three or four other characters when needed, when information needs to be conveyed that she doesn't have or she's not present for. So it will shift, to Valentina, or to Sant Angel. They'll switch to their points of view, and even I think even at one point it switches like very briefly to a couple of guards. It was like, but the whole reason why is, she's not present for that, so we need to convey some information. And I liked that about this author. Is like, well, this character doesn't know everything and is not present, so I'm going to switch characters just for half of a chapter or maybe just one chapter, just so we can see something else. And then we'll come back to our main character. And I thought that was good, and I just think there were these frustrating points where I was like, please just give me some more.
I think it's a good way to put it. And I know we'll get to some of this in the magic, but I'm just going to specifically say they talk about the smell of almonds. They talk about the smell of orange blossoms. They talk about like a pomegranate, things that seem like, wow, this is going to go somewhere cool, and we don't always get that stuff. So it's, I think the author left a lot to the imagination. And sometimes that can be great. And sometimes it can be a little bit irritating. Like,
Yeah.
come on now. And that's how I felt about this book. I completely agree with you. As much as I touted up Leigh Bardugo, she wrote Shadow and Bone series. I'm a huge fan of Six of Crows, the duology. It's way better than Shadow and Bone. Very pleased with her as an author. And in the Six of Crows series, I was pulled in. I could not put that book down. The crows were so good. And in this one, I was able to very easily put it down. And sometimes I need my cozy cubby spot to read. And I have to go back to that spot if I'm really in the moment. And I remember putting this, if I lose my book, I consider that not the best thing. That's like a signal to me. I would set this down outside while I was reading, upstairs, and I'd be like, where's my book? If it's a great book, I know where my book is. And I did lose it a couple times. So it never pulled me in. And it wasn't a bad story. It was a good story.
Yeah.
I did like this story. But her writing in this particular novel was subpar to what I've read from her in the past.
Okay.
Doesn't make her a bad writer.
Yeah.
Just makes this not one of her well-written books, even though it's a great story.
Yeah. And I've never read this writer, and based on what I've read of this writing style, I would be fine reading more of this writer. I would. There's enough here to like and enjoy that. And if you're saying she has better books, well, count me in.
Yay. Well, that's good to know. But I wouldn't, just for our viewers out there, I would not say that Shadow and Bone is one of those, as even though that got brought into a Netflix series, that set is very slow reading. The Netflix series is fast, and it pairs it with Six of Crows. It needs to put that duology in there to make it interesting. So yeah, I'd say if you wanted to pick up Shadow and Bone or pick up Leigh Bardugo, I'd actually start with the Six of Crows duology first and then go backwards and read Shadow and Bone. And then this is just it's a one-off. This is a true one-off. We should probably say that. This does not have a follow-up series. I can see some characters getting arcs. I could see that happening if she wanted to universe this a little bit. She's known for making universes, but I don't think that that's meant to happen here. This was wrapped up. They end it. No weird cliffhangers like we've had in the past. Thank you for that, Leigh Bardugo. But yeah, it's one and done, right?
Yeah, I would totally agree. This feels very much like a standalone book, and it's written in that way. Even though technically you could tell more stories of these characters or stuff in the setting, there's absolutely no need to because the story's been wrapped up.
All right, Rob, this is my favorite part. I've been waiting for this part of the episode, and that's to talk about magic, because I know you wanted magic. Yeah?
Yeah, I want some magic.
I know we haven't been getting enough magic on this series. And so this magic was not what I was expecting. I'm just going to say that right now. It was called the Familiar. I don't really know familiars in any way other than like witches and their black cats, and a familiar is like an animal that you have to like in your service. Like that's what I was expecting. And so with the scorpion on the cover with, you know, the rosary, which I thought was going to be like kind of anti-magic or maybe even satanic magic or some sort of ritual magic, I was surprised because this is very, very much divine magic.
Potentially.
Oh boy.
I think the magic in this book worked very well for this setting because it is set in the real world. You know, it's not like any of the characters are like walking around, throwing fireballs, flying through the air, you know, summoning, you know, monsters from hell. You know, none of that's actually kind of happening. But for the most part, so it feels like magic that could have existed, at least at one point in time. You know, kind of almost an urban fantasy type of magic, you know, very controlled, smaller scale, and that works well for this book. I actually really like the fact that there was essentially spells. You know, that's something we haven't really gotten much of at all in any of the books we've covered on the show so far. Is there haven't really been spells, you know, where you say the right magic words and an effect happens. You say different words and a different effect happens. That's, you know, that's how magic. That, you know, I grew up playing D&D, and you know, and that's how magic is supposed to work. You know, the wizard waves her fingers, says some words, and a spell happens, and so that feels very familiar. You know, and to me, but and then in D&D terms, a familiar is much like you described for a witch. It is a pet that actually helps augment a wizard or, you know, witch's spell casting. And so this familiar was actually quite a bit different from what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, and the what ends up being the familiar is very different than what I thought it was going to be, and that is a spoiler, so we can't say that. But like, I just was kind of shocked. I wasn't sure this book was going to go this direction. But let's talk about, I'm going to get your response to this too. So the magic was interesting. I was nervous that you wouldn't like this because it was essentially spell casting. But it's spell casting in a way where it's taken from clearly a religious, at least you have to assume it's religious. I thought they were going to tie it into like maybe Bible verses someday, but she kind of sings these chants, and there's limitations to the magic. So I wanted to hear what you thought about that. But like, just to explain to viewers at home who haven't read the book yet, like if she goes to the market to get goods for the home, like eggs, you know, and this home doesn't have a lot of money, and she, you know, they really need more, she can, you know, do this kind of chant that can make them multiply in her bag. She's not crazy with it. She'll come home with like 100 eggs. I mean, that would be suspicious, but like maybe 2 more. You know, she makes, but then the household thinks she's just good at haggling, right? It's enough that this could fit in her daily life. No one would be suspicious. But she can't, for example, there is limitations. She cannot make that happen with money. If she does that, it's almost like God sort of smiting her, sort of. He's like, ha ha! And he like like it'll turn into ants or spiders or something made out of that material. So like metallic spiders will crawl up her arm. It turns into a scary thing. So she can't use the magic to do things like that. Like it really is, I think, in her case at least, supposed to be used for good as long as it's harmless magic.
And I would say that that's what kind of, at least with her, that definitely makes it feel a lot more divine in nature. Is there's almost ethical limitations to her magic, whereas like when we've talked about limitations in magic in the past, it was like, oh, this power doesn't doesn't work against the color yellow, or that's an old Flash thing, or a Green Lantern thing, or or this or you can fly, or the one girl, she could slow down time. She couldn't stop it, but she could almost stop it. But time had to move a little bit. She couldn't fully stop it, and that's a limitation. Her limitations in this story are very much, you know, it has to still be kind of ethical. She can't go too. She can't really. She doesn't really do magic that causes harm. She doesn't really do magic that can make her personally rich or wealthy. The magic she's doing is small. Is more often than not, it's small things that just make life a little bit nicer. These are, as the book would describe them, miracles. She's she's making a chant and a miracle is happening, but it's happening in a reliable way. She says these words and this kind of effect happens. And that's what makes it feel like a spell.
And it seems that like the spells can happen in many different languages. So like the root source of the language would have an effect on the power. So there's like chants or songs that can be done in Spanish, for example, and there's some that can be done in Hebrew, and that source would affect the type of magic that it is. Which is when her tutor comes along to try to help her, develop her magic. He's very curious, like which language is this in, and that's what makes this very interesting for her. Is she has a multicultural background, and so she is able to. She grew up with like, well, we call it like, I grew up with like my sister's dad is Mexican, and so we called it Spanglish growing up. I learned a lot of Spanish words, but Mexican Spanish. And we used to always kind of mix them together with English and create our own like Spanglish at home. So she sort of does that with like Spanish, like Spain Spanish, and Hebrew. And she's sort of created her own mix of this, which is something I think that adds to why her magic is extra special.
Well, and that's what really made it feel like it was magic and not special and not just a superpower. Was when the tutor was trying to, he's like, well, what language do you say it in? And she absolutely doesn't want to say Hebrew, although she doesn't use Hebrew exclusively. It sounds like she even uses some Latin and some Greek words sprinkled in, but she's like, so she doesn't want to tell him, and he's like, well, if you don't want to tell me, or no, she says Spanish. She says, well, it's Spanish, and he's like, it's not Spanish. Spanish doesn't do magic. Yeah. It won't give you magic,
Not like that kind of magic.
Yeah,
anyway.
not like what you're doing. So you're using an older, stronger, magically stronger language, and I found that to be very interesting because that's also now he has that kind of knowledge, which means this isn't the first time. This is a real thing, and that's what made it feel like this is magic system. Whereas the other contestants in this story, their magic is a lot more, well, at least they seem to be a lot more single capabilities.
That's what I want to talk about. I'm so glad. Rob, we're getting so good at this. We're like getting in sync. Okay, so here is where I wanted to talk to you about something that's interesting. So I grew up in a very religious family. So it's it was good for my upbringing, but and I learned a lot. But let's just say I'm a little bit more looser now. But anyhow, there's blessings and there's miracles. So I kind of wanted to bring that up when we talked about this sort of magic, because this is where the divinity really comes in. Because there's some people who can practice magic, as you're talking about, who seem to be kind of singular focused, right? And that to me felt more of like a blessing. So there's someone who's like very, very lucky. You'd almost say they're blessed with luck. There's someone who can play instruments so very well. They have a gift or a blessing of music, and that can affect things around them. That can affect the birds and the animals and even people's emotions. And then someone else is blessed with the ability to foresee someone. They get dreams or visions. And that to me felt like blessings, like a God-given gift. Whereas Lucia, hers felt like miracles.
Where you're drawing this distinction is actually very interesting to me. I hadn't thought of it that way, as breaking them out that way, but the way you're describing it makes a lot of sense. Because you do have these people with these kind of special abilities. Like you have two different, over the course of the story, you have two different people that can essentially predict the future. And but the Inquisition specifically, they're interested in, like, the clergy. One of the second test of the three trials, the second test is basically for the clergy to decide, is this a God-given power or is this a devil-begotten power? Did you make a deal with someone down below? And so, like, Santanhel was telling Lucia, he's like, okay, don't do the fire thing today. That's probably not going to work out the way you hope. The priests don't want to see fire. Let's do something really kind of fun and pleasant.
Yeah, and I think, Santanhel's, really fun in that way. He's able to guide her through a lot of things. And he's seen a bit more of the darker side of this sort of magic, if you will. Which brings me to another section of magic, which reminds me of Supernatural. Did you ever watch the Supernatural series?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I did.
Okay. We get a bit of angels and demons in this book, a little bit. More of the angels, I think. It definitely speaks more to the divine and I think less towards the demons. But, I mean, we get, there's a couple, crossroads demon moments in here.
Absolutely.
You sort of touched on.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't go into that very deep. It's very transactional, almost brought up as oh, yeah, you made a deal. But they don't go into these deals. Not too much. Well, at one point they do a little bit, but and that just was this is supernaturally this is kind of fun. If there were to ever be a spin-off of this series, I would want it to go in that direction. There was so much divine in this one. I want to know what the demon side of magic is, the really, really bad stuff. Would be fun, but I think that adding in that mix of the supernatural, it being in demons or darker magic or transactions with the devil, was cool.
Yeah, and even the spots where it kind of discusses more the demonic deal, as it were. There's some that's kind of hinted at and some that's a little more explicit, but they kind of make it clear that if you make a deal with the devil, he's not actually, you wouldn't get power from that. The devil's gonna it's going to be a curse, or you're going to get an illusion of power. You're not going to get real power. You'll get a fake power, because the devil isn't a creative force. He's a destructive force. Whereas if this is divine magic, you can create things with that. And that actually is part of these trials, is deciding whether or not is the kind of magic they're doing, is it evil, or is it from God, or is it from the devil? And you kind of get an impression, reading between the lines, that at least one of the competitors probably got his from the other team.
Yeah. The other team, that's fun. Okay, so another thing I thought was fun with this magic was somewhat of old wives' tales, sort of. Don't drink too much caffeine, it'll stunt your growth. But in terms of magic, so there's even enough, let's keep in mind, people don't want to call this magic. It can't be witchcraft. This is the Spanish Inquisition. You will be, that's it. It's heresy. It's God is the word of the king. It can't be anything else, or you'll get thrown into a prison cell, right? And so in terms of people who can practice practice these miracles, well, I don't know to call it magic or miracles. In the book, it's definitely more miracles.
Yeah.
If you practice bad magic, you're almost warned. Like, it's quiet because no one talks about it, but you could split your tongue. Like, don't do bad magic or your tongue will split. You'll turn into a serpent, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, that was fun too. It's like there's just enough lore in the world, even though it's hush, hush, hush. You're not supposed to have this. Oh, but if you do, though, you better be good, or you'll serpent your tongue.
And I think that's one of the reasons why, like, Lucia's aunt isn't nearly as supportive of her, is because she saw Lucia's use of magic and was like, yeah, this is gonna come back and like bite me in the ass, because she's gonna get picked up by the Inquisition. She's gonna rat me out, and we're both going down. So therefore, we don't actually know each other as far as the world is concerned. We're strangers, because I can't risk the world knowing that we're related, because you are a threat to me when you're inevitably going to get exposed. And so she just kind of lightly helps Lucia, because she can't put herself in a position where she's going to put herself at risk.
Yes, and she's worked very hard to get where she is. They started with very humble beginnings, and Lucy is still stuck there. And this says it in the first few pages, so I don't think this is something that's like, too spoilery. Like, you get this early on. Like, she basically screwed her way to the top, like her aunt. Like, she's in a happy little life now, but she had to do some work to get there. So she's like, you better not screw this up, biatch.
And so she knew Lucia's magic from an early age, and knew that it was innocent and not a bad thing. She didn't make a deal with the devil or anything like that. And yet, even then, even though this is her family, she was like, I'm scared of this because of the way society will look upon you. So she told her, hide it, don't tell anyone, and don't tell anyone we're related.
All right, Rob. So you know what this means. We've gone through all the points I want to talk about, and now we're going to bring up your handy S-tier charts, and we are going to rate these books, kind of compared to the other books. You'll have the actual average of these ratings on the next episode, but our viewers will kind of understand where we are right now. So here we are. These are all the books that we've read so far, and we're deviating a bit. So, like, a good example is you have Some Desperate Glory way at the top. If I actually had to go back and adjust that, I might move it down into a solid 3, but that's okay. And you have the Sun, the Warhammer book as an A, and I have it as a C. So, we've been a bit all over the place, and then we definitely have the books that are kind of falling into the middle, and I think we're going to see that over this year of doing the podcast, that our middle is going to be quite heavy. I'm also seeing that I need to give things solid numbers, because all my books are ending up like in weird spots. So sorry about that.
No, it's great. I find that to be very entertaining.
All over the place. Okay, all right, let's do this. So, setting. Let's each do this. So we talked about it. What do you give this book? 1 to 5 for the setting.
I think this book established its setting very well. It kind of set some rules of the setting itself, and kind of made you kind of feel like you were in this world. And so I actually would put this as more of a 4. I think this really set the setting well and made you believe it.
All right, I love that. I'm giving the setting a 5 because I appreciated the spirituality in it. I never thought of magic as miracles. And that to me was like a big epiphany of like, whoa, blessings, miracles, 1600 Spain. I went on that journey. As much as this book didn't pull me in terms of the writing style, I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And it could be a lot stronger. I thought the setting was fantastic. So 5 for me, 4 for you?
Yeah.
Fair. All right. This takes us into characters, right? An interesting group in this one. So 1 to 5. How did you feel about the characters?
I think that...
And then I have another question for you.
Okay. I think the characters were all very well developed. Most of the characters had some sort of interesting backstory, even if it wasn't necessarily tragic or not everyone has to have an awful history, but but everyone had a lot of the characters had a history, and that played a role into how they're behaving in the current story, and I felt that was very good. Where I felt that this was lacking a little bit with characters was essentially development. There's not a lot of change from the beginning to the end of the book. A lot of the characters stay mostly the same, or they're just becoming a little bit better, or they or more confident. But it's not massive changes. There's no epiphany moment for any character except for maybe Valentina, and so I would actually rate this one at just 3. It's good. It's not great. It's just good.
So I'm giving characters a 4. And that's because I picture them in my head very, very well. And then, as you said, she took some side characters that I was not expecting to get a life at the end. And she took 2 of them that I think stand out. And really like wrapped those up in a super cool way where I'm like, wow, that's neato. And so I was very pleased about that. And some characters get their demise. I think we can say that. And I thought that was nice too. So yeah, 4 for me. Anything else you want to say about characters before I go on to writing? I don't want to leave you out here.
No, no. What do you have for writing?
Okay, so yeah, I mean, you're gonna start with this. We covered writing a little bit, but I know that there's a couple moments you wanted to talk about, so I want to make sure that you do before we rate the writing. This book is a romance too, so some romance gets brought into this. It's not full on Night Fae elf stuff, but there was some questionable, right? I know you wanted to go into that, and then yeah, the ending for both of us was just kind of just like, okay, different. Just different. So let's bring that into, we talked about the writing style, how we felt she wrote as a writer, but like story wise also, bring that into the writing. Where do you put this and why?
So the writing itself, like I'd mentioned earlier, that one of the things that kind of threw me off was that there's these spots where it's like I just so like there's this moment when the romance is essentially blooming, and and not only does it bloom for our main characters, but it kind of blooms for everyone in the castle, and suddenly just 2 guards look at each other and they're like, why deny? And then they just
Oh, baby.
and then they just start rutting in the grass, and like this
Yeah.
this hopeless married couple who just there it's a loveless relationship. Suddenly they're like, oh, and can would you like to share this chocolate with me? And then they're getting it on, and it was like, what just happened? Was this
This is so funny.
and so there's a lot of ways this moment could be explained. Was it Lucia? Was her losing her virginity suddenly, like, inspiring the whole castle with the hornies? Or was it like maybe one of the other competitors trying to sabotage her into fornication, which would be a problem.
Sinful too.
Yeah, well, as far as the Inquisition is concerned, that's a really bad sin. So like, but it's something happened, but no way is it explained. And so I found that whole the way that worked to be kind of off-putting, and this wasn't the only moment where I was like, just give me some more, explain it a little bit, have a third party character be like, twirling his mustache and be like, yes, that was me the whole time, just something like. And so I found that part of the writing style to be very frustrating. I guess for me, we were talking about this was the story. Like, how well was the story written, for my taste. And for my taste, like I said, if you're, I don't mind leaving things open for maybe a future story. You're gonna leaving a plot hook for a future book. This book is clearly not intended to have a future book. So don't leave these giant, dangling threads for me. I want some more explanation, and especially when it actually has an impact on this story, like what happened in that moment. Why doesn't her powers, work in these other situations? What is why did, like, how is the almost parasite, or like the way the relationship works. There's a two-way, almost a magical effect that's happening as part of this relationship. It was like, well, please explain that. I want to know more about that. That sounds really cool. So because of that, I'm actually gonna just put this at a 3. It's good. I think if those things had been explained a little bit, I would have gone with a higher rating.
I'm giving you a big ol' samesies here. I gave it a 3. I was not a fan how some things did not get wrapped up. Agree. This is a one and done. Like, please explain that to me. Now, having that said, I should say, I think I have it pulled up. The author, I think this is more common to do this now. Before the book was released, the author left a comment on Goodreads, kind of like talking about the story a little bit. And she says, like, this book is going to have some arcs. Like, and I think what she means by that, she might write a chapter here and there. It's common now for authors, especially like these types of YA authors, to come out with like a bonus chapter someday. Would not be surprised if that's what happens. She does say she wants to do something with that, but not write more books. Like, more books aren't coming, from what I understand.
Okay.
But so I think she wants to explain those things. I don't know when those are coming. I don't care enough about the book to try to seek them out later. I do follow Leigh Bardugo on socials, so like if she's like, oh hey, bonus chapter from The Familiar, if I happen to see it, sure, I'll read it, but I'm not going to seek it out. So that's kind of a bummer for me.
Okay.
I especially want to know why orange blossoms are always a smell associated with things, and like, where is that it really bothers me. Like, so yeah, and then that one was the same one as you, and then the sort of like crossroads demon sort of stuff, not really explained. At one point I wondered if it was a djinn or something. Like, I just couldn't quite tell. I still don't quite know. We're assuming maybe demon.
Or yeah, and
but,
it doesn't even. It could have just been another miracle worker of sorts.
Yeah, it could be.
It didn't.
Maybe.
Because someone led, did the deal or the ritual, so that could have just been another person that has special powers. You don't. It's it is weird.
I'd like to know though.
Yeah, I would.
It's on it. It has to do with important characters. So like we keep saying ritual, crossroad demon, djinn, miracle worker. Like we just don't know, and that's annoying.
Yeah. Especially
a major plot moment.
And especially because this is a one and done.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'd actually be a lot more kind with this criticism if I knew that there was going to be a future book and we were going to explore those themes in a future book.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Okay. So 3s for both of us. Let's move on to magic. How do you want to rate this magic system?
I mean, all told, it is fairly a limited magic system. We don't get to see enough of it to really say, oh, this is tier 5, tier S, this is amazing. We just don't get enough of it to really kind of give it that kind of a rating. However, I actually really enjoyed the magic, and I actually really liked your insight about blessed versus, miracle. I actually really like that, categorization that you came up with. And so I'm actually going to give this one a 4. I think it's...
Whoa. Was not expecting that from you. So I'm giving it a 3, actually. And I really enjoyed it. I really, really did. So I almost think I talked you up.
I think you
And I
did.
think you talked me down. So I think we're balancing. And here's why. I don't love divine magic. I'm just going to say that now. When it comes to different types of magic, I prefer elemental magic. I just prefer that. I like magic to be pulled from materials. Because, God is such a difficult thing to explain for so many types of people and religions. It's open to interpretation for many that leaves the magic open to interpretation too much. It's like the unexplained is a big empty. So like when you go, oh, it's divine, God gave it to you. Like it's like that to me is like, but how? But I loved it. I still loved it, and I wanted a couple things that were tough for me, because I loved the blessed, I loved miracles, I loved thinking like maybe even like Mother Teresa, could have done a miracle. What if it was sort of this magic in a way? Like I just love thinking about the real world like that because of the setting. So love, 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 love. Where I had issues where did the songs come from? I was really hoping that they would tie that into maybe Bible verses at the end. Like I'm like, ooh, is this like a hidden thing? Like is this gonna be like a Bible verse or a psalm or something? And maybe I don't know my Bible enough to know, but like I don't think it was, because the rhymes were too, they weren't like that. So that's the first part that kind of brought it down for me. And then the second part was I like magic to be balanced. And that can be in the form of dark magic, chaos magic, all sorts of things that kind of balance out the good magic. And just
Okay.
like you said, we didn't get enough from the underworld side. We know that there's demonic magic. We know that you could split your tongue by doing bad magic. We know, but there's some shadows that are kind of scary at one point during this. And so it's like it exists, but it wasn't focused on as much. And so goods of the book were she was limited. She couldn't make a pile of money. She seemed to make good ethical decisions. You used the word ethical earlier, and I love that. And so she didn't just try to like out magic her way out of things because you said she knew she'd at least be outnumbered. Like it's still the Spanish Inquisition. She can still die, right? So we have limitations. But yeah, so 3 for me, just because I didn't get the other side.
Okay.
Of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean that's still good.
Yeah. So and then we didn't talk about the contestants much, but it was nice to see the different styles of magic or blessings, and that was fun too. So it's weird to give it a 3 when I did love the idea of it. It could have just been more.
Yeah.
Okay, so now this is the part where we confuse people, because we just gave all of our ratings, and I gave 4s and 3s, put me like a 3.5 again, right? Generally speaking, and you have I gave a 5 on one of them. And you're mostly 3s and 4s. And so but there's things that can bring down our rating. Like, would you recommend this book to a friend? Could you see yourself reading the author again? You kind of mentioned that earlier. What if there was, publications that came after this? What if she changes her mind and is like, whoa, bestseller, let's do this again? Would you read it? And these kind of things impact our decision. So just because we rated certain sections doesn't mean that's going to be our rating of the book. So how would you rate the book as a whole?
Yeah. So for me, this book essentially comes down to I think the magic was well done. I think the plotting of the story was well done. I think the characters were engaging and interesting. I was not a fan of the actual romance angle in this book. It fell flat for me, but I'm probably not the intended audience.
You think I am? I'm just curious.
So
No? Yeah?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I probably am.
But I'm probably not the intended audience, and so and then like I said, and then I had the questions about it's like I just wanted more, and I think by wanting more, I definitely is not at 5. And it's not a 1 or a 2 because it is a good book. I did enjoy this book. It's well written, so it's basically going to be between a 3 and a 4. And I'm looking at our kind of tier chart here, and I think it fits a lot. It fits really well with like The Last Magician for me. the the way this came through, my enjoyment of the book really feels a lot more like The Last Magician, and so I would put it right there next to it.
All right, so I think that by the next show, I'm going to move my stuff around a bit because I want my stuff to fit into nice tiers. And we weren't doing this whole like, yes, but what are the reasons we might bring it up or down? So I think this is better than Face the Night for me.
Mm-hmm.
But it's Face the Night shouldn't be a 4. You know, it's in a weird spot. So I think I need to bring Face the Night down by the next episode. Put that on a 3. Some Desperate Glory. Basically, everything that's in the middle should be a 3, I think. And I think that this book is right on that line too. It's better than Some Desperate Glory and Face the Night, I think, but not better enough to be a 4, just for different reasons. So this book's a 3 for me. Yeah. It was good. It was a good book.
Yeah, and even just looking at this chart, that I could see myself making some adjustments, but maybe we'll do that at the end of the year for me.
Okay, yours I think are solid. You know where you have them.
Yeah.
I just need to move my halvesies down a bit. I think.
I have one book that I would change in retrospect.
Okay. I'm excited for this.
So we'll talk about that one later this year.
Okay, I like that. Suspense.
So, but yeah, no, this actually really was a good book. I'd be excited to I would share this with other people. I know a couple people that actually do like specifically historical fiction. And yeah. I think this might be a good kind of gateway for them, you know, if they're maybe not as much into fantasy. It is a very historical book, and maybe that's a good choice for them.
Yeah, agree.
And this is
period piece lovers.
And this is this is also an uncommon, time period for me. Like I really haven't seen this specific time period very much, so I'm glad I got to read that.
Yeah, I think this could even, like, in a interesting way, be a great book for people who, like you said, don't like fantasy at all. Like, have never, like, abracadabra, Harry Potter, sorcery stuff that they can't wrap their head around. But maybe, a religious group would really like this. If you think about the magic in terms of miracle working, in terms of, like, God gave you this to do this good thing with. I actually think that this could be a good gateway into magic systems for those who don't like to get too magic-y, actually.
Okay.
So, that's fun. All right, Rob. So we wrapped up. What is this? Our 26th, 27th episode?
20.
Somewhere in
28.
there. Yeah, is it? Yeah. Oh my gosh. We are chugging along. So I heard in order to have like a successful podcast, you've got to get past, was it like 10 episodes? And like, this is pretty good. We're doing okay. People are subscribing now. Thank you so much for new subscribers. We appreciate that. We are reading A Sword of Bronze and Ashes next, which is Rob's suggestion. So I will be doing my halfway on this book next. If you guys like this type of book club where you're getting two very different opinions on books, please join our Discord. The link is below. We'd love to hear your discussions on these books. And also check out the Amazon links if you're looking for the past books that we've read. But yeah, I had a good time on this one, Rob.
Yeah, this was a good book, and I would have probably never read it had you not suggested it. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Let's see you all next time for my halfway episode. Like and subscribe. It helps us a ton. We're almost to that 100 subscriber mark, which will help us get a custom link. So please do that for us. Thanks all.
All right. Thank you.